Gary Chen, for your question. I fully appreciate that because the whole COVID pandemic has been going on for more than a year, to different sectors in the community and to the general public, there's been much impact. Especially Mr. Chen and other members are very much concerned about cross-boundary people movements. So we've been keeping in close contact with the CPG. We try to ascertain the conditions that will allow this gradual resumption of cross-boundary travel. Now, in fact, before the fourth wave of the outbreak, that is in early November, we had a plan. We put in place a quota system for people to go back to Guangdong, but unfortunately, there was the fourth outbreak, and that wave of outbreak hasn't actually subsided yet. So there are not yet the conditions to resume such travel. I believe, though, the vaccination program would help. That's why we've been appealing to the public to take the vaccine. We have also had initial discussions with the relevant authorities on the mainland. That is, after people take the 2 doses of vaccine, perhaps there could be certain conditions for relaxing certain restrictions, so we will continue to move in that direction. Ms. Eunice Yong, I wonder if the Chief Executive is aware that there is an M+ museum at the West Kowloon Cultural District is about to be opened, but then there is the so-called, arts pieces that really cause great concern to us, because these pieces are actually to spread the message or to spread hatred against the country. We've been to many museums, but most of the display pieces are to show the beauty of art, but then we have spent so much time and effort building the West Kowloon District Office. How come there will be display of art pieces that are suspected to have breached the national security law, and that also is an insult to the country? Well, I want to know whether these pieces are actually against the national security law and the basic law, and how are you going to make sure that such items that incite hatred against the country would not be displayed? Chief Executive, as you know, the West Kowloon Cultural Project District is a key project for Hong Kong in arts and culture. And then there's also the Palace Museum to be opened. And in the 14th five-year plan, there's mentioned that we could start promoting cultural exchanges between the mainland and Hong Kong. Now, M+ Museum is a flagship museum of the West Kowloon Cultural District. Would the art pieces to be displayed there breach the so-called red line? Because with the national security law in place, we have to safeguard national security. In particular, public officers are expected to do so. So every public officer has to act with caution. But of course, here we're talking about the Arts and Culture Center. We have to respect the freedom of artistic expression. But I'm sure staff are able to tell what is freedom of artistic expression, and whether certain pieces are really meant to incite hatred or to destroy relations between two places and undermine national security. So we will be on full alert in watching such matters. Mr. Kenneth Lau. The Census and Statistics Department yesterday announced the latest unemployment rate at 7.2% is the highest for many years, and there are over 260,000 persons who are employed, and 150,000 are unemployed. But then the government allows the bus operators to increase the fares despite economic downturn. Of course, you've extended the public transport fare subsidy scheme to the end of the year, and you have raised the subsidy amount to $500. But then many are saying this kind of subsidy won't help them at all, so this would just add to their burden. So, Chief Executive, are you aware of the plight the public are in? Because the job market is poor, that's because the pandemic is not put under control yet. So do you have any means to achieve zero infection, Chief Executive? I thought Mr. Kenneth Lau was going to ask me about bus fare increase, but then at the end it's about the pandemic. Yes, what Mr. Lau said is right. Now we have an employment rate of 7.2%. It's a surge, and we're really concerned about that. In the past year, we have done much to preserve jobs or even create jobs. But if we could not put the pandemic under control, there couldn't be cross-boundary travel. There couldn't be resumption of tourism activities, and then there is no international travel. Then of course it would be difficult to for the economy to recover. That's why our first priority remains fighting the epidemic. And as you can see, we have tried our very best, in everything we do to fight the epidemic. But then around the world, you see that on top of government effort and effort of the experts, we need the full cooperation and support of the people of that particular place. Now, if we require people to go for compulsory testing, they won't do it. And now we encourage people to take the vaccines. People don't do that. And then people don't wear a mask, and they don't observe social distancing requirements. Well, then, every time there's an outbreak, we have to do a large amount of work to suppress the outbreak, but we're still not able to achieve zero infection. Of course, achieving zero infection remains our objective, but we need the cooperation of the public. Whatever the government could do, I've asked my colleagues to do their best. It's exactly as what you said at the last sentence, in your last sentence, that if we couldn't control the epidemic, there's nothing we can do about the economy. Mr. Horace Cheung, thank you. At Christmas Eve, some clients, of a law firm did not have a peaceful Christmas Eve because their law firm was taken over. Now, they probably spent their life savings to buy a home. Their deposits were frozen in the law firm's account, and then they've been asked to pay the property price difference as a result. So it's become a nightmare for them. Some of these victims told us they have to actually get loans from friends and relatives. They even have to take out high interest loan. So they're now in heavy debt. Now, there are supposed to be means to protect the consumers from malpractice of law firms, but then when law firms are taken over in the past decade or so, we could see that the clients really suffered. Now, everyone is trying to follow the rules. No one is doing anything wrong, but the victims have nowhere to turn to. Now, if a law firm's not taken over, then the clients have a way out. But once a law firm is taken over, then that's a death sentence for the clients. So I wonder if the government would consider re-examining and improving the current law firm system. So you have to find a way to get back to the original aspiration of protecting clients and also restore the confidence of the public in law firms. Mr. Chief Executive, well, Mr. Horace Cheung is a lawyer himself. Of course, you know that the legal profession, like many other sectors and professions, they care very much about the self-regulation. Now, my position has always been we have great respect for professional autonomy, but then the government does have a role to play at certain times, because at the end of the day, we're talking about protecting the interests of the public and the safety of the public. Now, I don't have enough time, so I cannot really go into detail on what we could do about that, but the relevant directors of Bureau will certainly look into that. Thank you.
Wang Jingquang, Chief Executive. The unemployment rate has now reached 7.2%. The catering and the retail industry were the hardest hit. I think we all know the unemployment rate can still fall further. A lot of the companies hope that this vaccination program can salvage our economy. And yet, the adverse events following immunization, even though they're not numerous, and yet human lives are at stake here, which will indeed make some individuals worried and got cold feet. May I ask the administration, how can you step up the publicity and enhance the transparency to illustrate the relationship between adverse events and immunization public, but using data to explain to the public so that we don't have any doubts and fear in order for the vaccination program to proceed smoothly. Chief Executive, thank you, President, and thank you, Mr. Wang's reminder. In fact, this COVID-19 vaccine are developed in a fairly short amount of time. The public confidence compared to the perennial vaccine, there might be a difference. The government knows how to it's important to inspire public confidence in this approved vaccine for emergency use. That's why we have set up a advisory panel to do more public explanation. And since the role of the vaccination program, the expert committee have been convening meetings frequently and meet the press. As of now, none of these severe events or deaths which the expert deemed are directly related to immunization. And how do you assure the public? For those lethal cases, and what are the actual death rates of their underlying conditions, as we have explained in our press releases. Of course, we can elaborate on that. Allow me to say, to encourage the public to take up the vaccines, besides a matter of trust, we also may need to consider incentives or consider what kind of convenience it might provide. We are thinking of that, not only any incentives on traveling, and also whether we can consider any room to relax the social distancing measures. These are all being considered. Mr. Leung Chi-cheng, Chief Executive, according to Article 24 of Basic Law, before the formation of the HSAR, the children under 21 are all permanent residents. And the Immigration Department declared that the immigration ordinance in and for the non-Chinese Hong Kong residents, if they have not lived in Hong Kong, will lose their permanent resident status if they have been absent from Hong Kong continuously for not less than 36 months. Well, the children of the permanent residents, and due to the pandemic, they were not able to return to Hong Kong within 36 months, and they may lose their Chinese nationality. Will the Chief Executive can allow these children to preserve their Chinese nationality, a permanent residency, rather? I believe that some residents may be troubled by the current developments. And while in the context of COVID-19, that we're not able to return to Hong Kong, we've led to all kind of phenomenon. This has unprecedented. That's why I urge the department chiefs to explore any discretion and also take a considerate approach on a case-by-case basis. The policy itself is sound, and Mr. Leung is not challenging our policy. As there's no cross-border travel, they couldn't return to Hong Kong, or they couldn't travel to mainland. Well, some of the mainland, those who live in the mainland could not return to Hong Kong to see their doctors. We need to come up with some solutions to resolve the difficulty faced by these residents concerned. We're well aware of this, and the Director of Immigration will look into how to resolve this on a discretion basis. Mr. Martin Liao. The omnibus bill to improve the election system in Hong Kong is an important matter. The executive and the legislative branch will explore options to expedite the scrutiny of this important bill. And last month, the Chief Executive mentioned that in the remainder of the legislative term, we need to move 5 pieces of legislation amendment to suit local circumstances. Chief Executive, in such circumstances, would this legislative proposal can be accommodated? And what is the timetable for implementing these 5 pieces of legislation? And thank you, Mr. Lau, for remembering this. And last question time, I propose amendments to 5 legislative areas, for which we still hope to table them within this term of LegCo for scrutiny. For the 5th one, we mentioned that it would start commencing consultation on the fire safety legislation shall start consultation within this term. It couldn't make it in time for the bill to table to LegCo. Thus, the legislative exercise is going ahead. And however, we do need to take priorities. When we submit this bill to improve the election system, we shall work with LegCo to allocate as much time possible to scrutinize this election legislation. For the all other bills committee, if necessary, they may need to suspend for a while so that this piece of law can pass first. I don't want to see the lawmakers working too hard while need to put their attention on this key piece of legislation while requiring all the bill committee to meet up for deliberations. I shall work with the President and the Chairman of the House Committee for a proper arrangement of work. Mr. Tommy Cheng, I'm glad to hear from Chief Executive to mention whether we provide incentive for vaccination. In the past few months, I've been fighting for the karaoke and nightclubs and those magic parlors and also those all kinds of scheduled premises. Those premises are doing very tough, and they have been closed for almost 4 months. While you are deliberating, and while the employees of the scheduled premises can get vaccinated, and also encourage the catering industry to get vaccinated as well. Let's say you're allowing 4 customers per table where you can relax to 6 per table. I hope this can be done. However, my question today is, on the 4th wave of the Anti-epidemic fund, I've asked why you're offering so little. Well, the secretary claimed that you're offering 1 month instead of 1 month. Of the karaoke and bars and nightclubs, and also magic parlors and so on, they have been closed for 4 months. Will the Chief Executive find some funding for these affected sectors by offering more money as they have been closed for more than 4 months? Mr. Cheng, I understand that the pandemic won't have a huge blow to the industries, especially for the premises that have yet allowed to open. The government have offered 4 rounds of anti-epidemic fund costing over $130 billion. Recently, the financial sector's budget have also offered some relief measures that offer the hard-hit industries and these measures in the budget are fully rolled out as we need to pass the relevant legislations and implementation. Therefore, I'm afraid that I'm not in position to promise another round of anti-epidemic fund or another round of cash support. In my question to answer to Mr. Ken Lau, we need to contain the pandemic as soon as possible. If we can contain the pandemic, we can allow these premises to reopen. Hopefully, we can solve this problem. As for you are appealing the catering industry workers to get vaccinated, I'm grateful for this. However, we do need to work harder. I asked my colleague this morning, the vaccination of this sector is not too high at this stage. I urge Mr. Tom Cheng to work harder. Mr. Poon Siu Ping, Thank you, President. Chief Executive, at the previous policy address, you mentioned that you're able to help the people can return to their livelihood, and yet Hong Kong is not out of the woods. And the unemployment rate announced yesterday is at 7.2%, and Hong Kong's poverty situation has deteriorated. A lot of the unemployed workers had held hopes for the government and hoped that the government would set up unemployment assistance. The government did not heed this demand, and which left a lot of workers frustrated. Workers are now concerned that when can we get back to our lives and how do you alleviate poverty? With the Hong Kong poverty situation getting more severe, would the government have any new policies or measures? Or would you learn from the mainland and to declare war on poverty and set up a poverty reduction target? Thank you, President. Poverty is a complex issue with many causes. It's hard to give Mr. Poon a satisfactory answer. As a advanced developing company in terms of GDP per capita, Hong Kong's poverty, unlike the mainland, measured by the absolute poverty. Therefore, it's hard to eliminate poverty in a relatively poor picture. That's why there's always some part of the population below the poverty line, as we are using the relative poverty yardstick. Over the past few years, well, as you will scrutinize the budget later, the social welfare spending, recurrent expenditure, already tops all other policy areas. I believe that it probably in the third ranking a few years ago, behind healthcare and education. That shows our endeavor in social welfare. Otherwise, we wouldn't spend this much. Over the past few years, we have done a lot. I do agree that there still quite some work to be done. Well, now that we get a clear picture, we can resolve the housing problem, which allow the grassroots to have suitable accommodation as in public housing. And also with some economic regaining momentum and provide more jobs, I believe that poverty can be alleviated. Well, after we manage to contain the pandemic, we hope we can have more room to tackle the land and the housing crisis. Alice Mack. The central government decided to improve the Hong Kong election system. I hope that they see that infighting among Hong Kong within the past 22 decades has taken its toll in Hong Kong. That's why by improving our election system to implementing patriots governing Hong Kong to improve our livelihood, Vice Premier Han Zheng in meeting the NPC and the NPC delegates that the livelihood issues are something we can work on, and also on employment and housing. I believe that the government has determination to improve our livelihood work. The Chief Executive has approved private members' bill on housing policy. That's the Waterworks Amendment Bill. This bill will get the first reading later today. And for those tenants of divided units overcharged by the landlord, this could be good news. On behalf of these tenants, I must thank the Chief Executive supporting this amendment. Unfortunately, and yesterday, the Chief Executive approved, the Council approved the price adjustment for bus fare. We have such high employment rate, reaching as high as 72%. Why are you still approving such price hike proposal? Especially when the economy is going downwards. Mr. Poon just said this country have set up this poverty reduction target. Why is Hong Kong failed to address the poverty issue, and government actually allowing the bus company to raise the fares?
Chief Executive, on poverty issue in Hong Kong, I hope that there will be another opportunity for a detailed discussion with members. Yesterday, the Executive Council approved the bus fare increase for franchised buses I would like to say a few words here. I'm sure the Secretary for Transport and Housing will be giving explanation in detail in public. Now, for this bus fare increase decision is a really difficult one for the government. Is exactly as Ms. Alice Mack or Mr. Kenneth Lau pointed out. We're fully aware that the economy is in doldrum. We have a high unemployment rate. People are suffering. If we increase the bus fare now, of course, it will add to the burden of spending for the public. But then, you know, in the past 2-3 years, for these various reasons we're aware of, we have not approved bus fare increase applications by bus operators. It's not the first time that they have put forward this application. For a bus operator, there's been no fare increase for 7 years, 8 years, or 9 years. You can imagine if you're in business, you know, how is it that they are able to maintain the top bus service quality expected by the public without any fare increase for such a long time. So we have studied in detail the accounts of all the bus operators. All of them are really suffering huge losses. If there is no increase in bus fare, that means the quality of bus service will substantially go down, or bus companies may have to make lay off staff or put staff on no pay leave. So that's why we try our very best to lessen the impact of bus fare increase, you know, for the toll exemption fund and so on. Now this time around, this fund is able to serve a purpose, is able to lessen the impact of the bus fare increase. And then we also have relaxed the threshold and extended the arrangement to the end of the year under the public transport fare subsidy scheme. Hopefully all these measures will help to lessen the impact of bus fare increase. But if we do not allow bus fare increase, there will be the adverse consequences that I mentioned, and you will see them at once. Last member to put a question, Mr. Michael Ten. Thank you, Chief Executive. In the past 13 months, you have, been, making a full effort in taking lead in the anti-epidemic effort. We're grateful to you. But of course, you have to suppress and lift strategy in the light of the latest circumstances for the epidemic, and we could understand that. Last July, you decided that the whole country would have to wear masks. At the time, there's no mention of the fitness centers. And then on the 28th February, you decided to allow fitness centers to be open again. But did experts ever advise you that it's only a matter of course that you should ask people to wear a mask if they go to a fitness center? What was the experts' recommendation at the time? Because I'm worried. You know, are there any other circumstances that people should wear masks, otherwise it would lead to an outbreak? Now, the way we enforce law is that if there is a fire, we put it out, but we don't know when a fire will happen. So how does the government work really? When you decide on whether to go for a lift or suppress, what are your considerations? Now, in the past year or so, the government does have a system in our anti-epidemic effort. Last year, on I think it was the 26th of January, the level was raised to the highest level, that is the emergency level, and I started to chair the relevant steering committee. We fully aware of the need that we need to have expert advice. That's why we set up this expert panel. It's consisting of 4 experts. Now, every time when we consider social distancing measures, or if we need to impose conditions under these social distancing measures, such as the need to keep a distance of 1.5 meters or wear a mask and so on, these are all considered under this system. But then the greatest difficulty is that these are not purely scientific decisions, because if they are, it will be easy. If you set the conditions, you meet the conditions, then we go for this or that. But then it's always a matter of balance. It's how much the public could take. If we don't, go for a lift, sometimes there is pandemic fatigue. In Western countries, you see there is serious pandemic fatigue. People don't really care about what the government tells them. They even take to the street to protest against government measures. So we need to strike a balance. For fitness centers, when people are jogging, you ask them to wear a mask, and they may be out of breath, or there could be other adverse health impact. It's the same for people who jog on the street. We would relax the requirement. Now there is this huge cluster of outbreak. If we allow fitness centers to continue to operate, we have no choice but to go for this step. So we could only advise people to jog a bit slower in the fitness center, so they could use these gym facilities safely. That is the end of the session. The Chief Executive, after the Executive leaves the chamber, then we'll proceed with the regular meeting immediately. The Chief Executive now leaves the chamber. Members, please stand up. The Chief Executive's question time ends now.
The regular council meeting now commences. Questions. Question 1, the Honourable Jimmy Ng. Thank you, President. As the coronavirus disease 2019 epidemic has dealt a heavy blow to the economy of Hong Kong, the government has launched one after another 2 tranches of the Employment Support Scheme, or ESS, to provide financial support for eligible employers to assist them in paying employees' wages from June to August and from September to November last year, respectively, thereby retaining those employees who may otherwise be made redundant. Regarding the government's support for those employers and employees affected by the epidemic, will the government inform this council? 1. As some employers have relayed that the application procedure and the vetting and approval procedure of the second tranche of ESS were obviously more complicated and lengthy than those of the first tranche, resulting in their not receiving the wage subsidies under the second tranche of ESS for a prolonged period of time. Of the reasons for that. 2. Of the respective numbers of complaints and reports of abuse received about ESS so far, together with a breakdown by the type of issues involved, as well as the follow-up actions taken and their outcomes. And 3. As the government has made it clear that it would not launch a third tranche of ESS, but the epidemic has not subsided, and some members of the public are worried about the onset of waves of enterprises closing down and unemployment, whether the government has plans to set up a loan fund for occupation switching for the unemployed, so as to support unemployed persons for self-enhancement and occupation switching. If so, of the detail of not the reasons for that. Secretary for Labour and Welfare. President, in consultation with relevant bureaus and departments, my consolidated reply to the members' question is as follows. 1. The objective of the ESS is to preserve employment during the pandemic by providing time-limited financial assistance to employers to retain employees who may otherwise be made redundant. We've endeavored to streamline and simplify the administrative arrangements in designing the scheme with a view to dispersing wage subsidies as soon as practicable, so as to assist as many businesses and employees as possible within a short period of time. The ESS Secretariat has been processing all applications in an expeditious manner. Actual figures have indeed reflected that most employees receive wage subsidies within a short period of time. Within 3 weeks upon closure of the first tranche of ESS, the Secretariat has disbursed wage subsidies to about 110,000 employers, accounting for 70% of the total number of employers who have successfully applied for the first tranche. Leveraging on the experience of the first tranche, the Secretariat has been more efficient in processing applications in the second tranche. Within 3 weeks upon closure of applications for the second tranche, the Secretariat has disbursed wage subsidies of 125,000 employers, about 8% of the total number of employees who are successful, way above the 70% disbursement rate in the first tranche. As regards the remaining 20% of employer application in the second tranche, they require longer processing time because they involve cases of reduction in second tranche wage subsidies due to incompliance with the terms and conditions of the first tranche. Employees have been participating in other retirement plans outside the context of mandatory profit scheme or omission of information relating to application. Second, as at 9 of March 2021, the Secretariat has received a total of 1,105 complaints, 41% of which involves unreasonable reduction in the number of employees or redundancy. 60% which requests employees to take continuous no-pay leave, 10% of which did not promptly disperse wage to employees or reduction in wages, and 2% of suspected cases of winding down of the company or change of business operators. The Secretariat and the processing agent will proactively and seriously follow up all reported cases. The Policy Innovation and Coordination Office, responsible for implementing ESS, established a review panel to review the investigation report and relevant MPF scheme records of employees for each reported case, with a view to determining if the employers concerned have complied with the relevant terms and conditions under the scheme, as well as informing the complainants of the results upon conclusion of investigation. As of 1,105 reported cases, the Secretariat has, as at 9th of March, completed investigation of 1,069 cases and replied to the complainants. Of the 1,069 cases with investigations concluded, the Secretariat has thus far confirmed that 608 employers did not comply with the terms of the ESS. The Secretariat will, in accordance with the terms and conditions of the ESS, request relevant employers return to the government the unspent balance of wage subsidies and or pay a penalty to the government in respect of the failure to maintain the committed headcount of paid employees. Moreover, the Secretariat has referred 274 cases to the Labour Department under the Employment Ordinance because they involve labour disputes, and referred to the Customs and Excise Department, as well as one report or complaint to the Immigration Department and the Inland Revenue Department, respectively. In addition, the Secretariat has referred 23 complaints to the MPF Authority concerning MPF contributions made by employers. 3. In view of the fluctuations of the epidemic, which has seriously affected Hong Kong's economy and our labour market, the government has kept in view changes of the actual circumstances and tried to employ ways to strengthen assistance for the unemployed and their families. In light of the stiff challenges brought about by the epidemic to Hong Kong's employment situation and overall economy in the past year, the government has implemented a host of measures to create and stabilize job opportunities, and also provided relief measures to sectors and individuals hard hit by the epidemic or affected by the anti-epidemic and social distancing measures. Through the anti-epidemic fund and the budget, the government has increased government expenditure substantially to combat the epidemic and roll out relief measures totaling about $300 billion. It is anticipated that the consolidated deficit for the financial year 2020-21 will surge to about $250 billion. The government will, having regard to the development of the epidemic and the situation of different sectors, review the effectiveness of our measures and introduce enhancements if needed. The job market is gloomy, and the tremendous challenges to Hong Kong's economic situation and overall economy has caused the government to implement various measures to promote job creation, employment, and to support individuals' families' financial difficulties. The relevant measures include the provision of 2,000 employment places under the GBA Youth Employment Scheme, the third tranche of the Love Upgrading Special Scheme launched by the Employees Retraining Board in January this year, with a double quota for 20,000 trainees, followed by fourth tranche of the scheme to be launched in June. Uplift of the ceiling of the on-the-job training allowance payable to employers under the Labour Department's employment program for the elderly and middle-aged, the youth employment and training program, the work orientation and placement scheme, together with payment of retention allowance on a pilot basis to eligible employees engaged under these programs, and also 2 rounds of the one-off living subsidy for low-income households not living in public housing and not receiving CSSA program, and 1 round of the one-off allowance for new arrivals from low-income families program launched by the Community Care Fund. In addition, the government has launched the time-limited special scheme of assistance to the unemployed under CSSA scheme to temporarily relax the asset limits for the able-bodied persons by 100% for 12 months from June 2020 to May 2021. The government, during the 6-month period from April to September this year, will implement the time-limited new arrangement under the special scheme. Specifically, the cash value of insurance policies of able-bodied CSSA applicants will not be counted as asset during the grace period of 1 year. The financial sector will also allocate $6.6 billion to create another 30,000 time-limited jobs. We'll continue to listen to the views of the public and provide more assistance for the unemployed and the families in light of the development and needs. Thank you, President. Mr. Jimmy, Thank you, President. Every time we mention support to enterprises and employees, the Secretary will then roll out host of measures implemented by the government. But in addition to what the government has done, we want to know how effective they've been. In this year's budget, now for AEF and also the budget together has launched a number of relief measures involving over $300 billion, accounting for about 5% of our GDP. Of course, the government is willing to heavily support employees and also enterprises. In general, they will serve some effect, but you have to bear in mind that our unemployment rate has reached a 17-year high to 7.2%. Many enterprises cannot remain afloat anymore, and unemployed persons are crying out for help. Has the government ever reviewed the effectiveness of different support measures? And if they are not effective, shouldn't they be improved? And if the government is not doing enough, shouldn't it do more? Secretary. For all items, we do have a review plan. For instance, ESS in the member's question, because we still have outstanding work. So at a later stage, when the ESS is more or less complete, we will conduct a review. But of course, we don't have to wait until the whole program is over before we review it. We've been monitoring the information such as the impact on the various sectors. Now, if you look at the overall figures, in July to November last year, ESS had indeed lowered the impact on our labor market by the pandemic. Now, in July last year when we had the third wave, now if we compare that to the situation to a few months ahead, in fact, there were 50,000 increase in the number of employees. So the situation was improved a bit, but of course, an overall review will have to wait until the ESS is completed and will give an account to the Council. Mr. Christopher Zhang. Thank you, President. The epidemic has gone on for more than a year. Many sectors, the tourism, catering, and retail industries affected, in particular, are hard hit. The government should help provide relief to them. Now, for the financial services sector, the small and medium-sized brokerages have been hard hit as well. You may think that because the securities market is very active, we are not affected, but this is not really the case. We have $200 and $300 billion of turnover per day, and IPOs are very successful. But all these business is being swallowed by the large brokerages, and for the small, medium-sized brokers and agents and back office staff, they are still on no-pay leave. Now, because of the keen competition, we are very much affected, and most support measures from the government are for the unemployed. What about those whose wages have been reduced or on no-pay leave? They are not getting any help. Will the government consider launching new measures to help people whose income has been affected, in particular practitioners in the financial service sector, to help them tide over the difficult period? Or will you launch loan schemes so that members of the financial services sector and even the self-employed will still be eligible to apply? Thank you. Regarding the situation in the financial services sector, I'm sure the FSTB are very concerned about them, and I understand that Mr. Stephen Zhang will also reflect our views to them, and I will relay the issues raised by Mr. Christopher Zhang to the Revenue Bureau. Now, because of the epidemic, many employers can't afford to keep the total headcount if all of them still do not take no-pay leave, and therefore there is this arrangement of job sharing. For instance, instead of working for 5 days, you go to work for 4 days. If you do not share the job, that in fact the employer can lay off 20% of the headcount, and this is the flexibility of our market, so that in a mutually understanding manner, we can then adapt to the new business environment. Of course, taking no pay leave would affect income, but that is better than for 20 to 40% of the staff being dismissed. So I hope both employers and employees can face this economic situation together. Mr. Felix Chung. Thank you, President. 2 weeks ago, President, you went to Beijing to attend meetings of CCP and then when the conference closed, there was a press conference. The meeting asked our Vice Premier, Mr. Li Keqiang. Now, the question was, China has been very successful in controlling the pandemic, and what are the reasons for that? And then Mr. Li said that it is important to keep the enterprises afloat so the jobs can be kept and unemployment rate will not rise. The Secretary said that for the 2 tranches of ESS, they were successful in helping to lower the unemployment rate, but now the rate stands at 7.2%, and the Secretary said that there is every chance that the rate will continue to rise. Our Vice Premier Li said that keeping enterprises can then keep our employees. So why can't you have a 3rd tranche of ESS in order to contain the unemployment rate? Why not? Now you can see that people are unemployed and unemployment rate is rising, and the government is numb to their plight. Why isn't the government launching a 3rd tranche of ESS? Secretary, both the FS and the C have taken similar questions from members. Well, in designing ESS last year, we really didn't know how long the pandemic would last. Even today, we're not sure when the pandemic will end. Back then, we're considering whether we should have each tranche lasting 3 months or 6 months, and we wanted to invite applications within a few weeks' time. So the design was very simple. I think there was a thorough debate in the Finance Committee of this Council back then, whether we wanted more time for a better design, or do we want the scheme to be simple and straightforward so the applications could start within a few weeks. So we spent about $90 billion or $45 billion in each tranche under ESS. Can we be more focused? Yes, we have tried. Now, for large enterprises, if they would only be eligible to apply if they proved that they were making a deficit, then we could at most save $10 billion, and we would still have to spend $35 billion in each tranche. So we had great reservations, and many asked whether we can have the 3rd or even the 4th tranche of ESS. I think that question was already addressed in the past. Your question not answered? Of course not. I'm asking them to implement ESS to contain unemployment. I did not ask him to explain the whole operation. My question was whether yes or no. FS Secretary already answered that question. It's out of financial considerations. Mr. Yu Siwing, it was just announced that in the past 3 months, unemployment rate rose to 7.2%. The unemployment rate among tourism-related industry was higher, 11%. The tourism sector has been frozen for 1 year, and there is no idea when we can revive. So how are you going to review measures to help them? The Secretary had not said no to this, but for sectors particularly hard hit by the pandemic, how are you going to help the employers and employees of these sectors? Secretary. Well, different policy bureaus do care of the employees under their respective policy areas. And the question is, how much can be done with our resources? Now, we have extended some items of AEF. Some of the measures have been improved or enhanced, but that's within our financial capability. Some sectors will face a prolonged adjustment. So we are thinking how we can assess these employees. If need be, if they want to switch their trade, how we can help. We hope that under the special love upgrading scheme run by the ERB, we can help these employees to tide over the difficult period. Mr. Yu Xiwing, what is your question? I'm asking, under what circumstances are they going to extend a helping hand to industries particularly hard hit? As I said, it depends on the circumstances and also our financial capability. Mr. Shuka Fai, some industries could not operate for over 200 days because of the epidemic, as Mr. Tommy Zhang said. Some clubs, bars, karaoke's, starting from the 2nd of December to now, it's been over 3 months. They are not allowed to operate, but they have to continue to pay rent. Some employees may be on no pay leave, but some are still receiving pay. Some association, clubs and trades came to me not long ago telling me that they are heavily indebted. So for shops and trades that were not allowed to operate for 3 months, how can they survive? Now, if another round of ESS cannot help all the businesses in Hong Kong, but for premises that were not allowed to operate, can you give them special consideration so that they don't have to wind up? Secretary, yes, I can relay to the relevant bureaus the need of different sectors. Mr. Lo Kwok Wing, Lo Wai Kwok. Yes, the first and second tranches of ESS has helped employees to stay in jobs and to help enterprises in difficulties to continue to pay their employees. But then the second tranche has closed for a while, and still I'm receiving calls for assistance from individual enterprises. They are of the view that for the second tranche, perhaps because of communication breakdown or perhaps because they could not approach the relevant enterprises or organizations, the applications were not granted, and then they were only informed after a long time, and the time for making representations was lost. I'm not referring to individual cases, but I hope the Secretary can be more lenient, because enterprises want to keep their employees, and I hope you will not be too strict, Secretary. As said in my main reply, and the second tranche of ESS is already closed, and we are dealing with employers that have not fulfilled the relevant terms and conditions, and we may have to issue penalty notices and referral to various cases. In fact, all the cases have been processed. Thank you.
Question 2, Mr. Martin Liao. President, since last year, a number of international organizations such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank have one after another, and on a number of occasions, called on the governments of various countries to promote a post-epidemic green recovery of their economies, and to steer their economic revitalization measures along the direction of green and low-carbon transformation and sustainable development. China has also called on various countries to seize the historic opportunities presented by the new round of scientific and technological revolution and industrial transformation and promote a post-epidemic green recovery of the world economy. The Hong Kong SAR government has also stated that it will support the green recovery of the economy. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, of the plans and measures to promote a post-epidemic green recovery of Hong Kong's economy? In respect of each measure, the anticipated manpower and expenditure involved, economic benefits to be generated, and implementation timetable, and how the measures will help Hong Kong reach its latest targets of achieving carbon neutrality before 2050. 2, of the plans and measures to support Hong Kong's various sectors in seizing the green economic opportunities in the short, medium, and long terms in areas such as green finance, green innovation and technology, as well as green industries. And 3, whether it has assessed the respective green employment opportunities to be brought by the aforesaid measures for Hong Kong, whether it has set new targets, including those relating to economic benefits and employment opportunities, for the future development of Hong Kong's environmental industry. If so, of the details, if not the reasons for that. Secretary for the Environment. President, as the COVID-19 pandemic has dealt a heavy blow to our economy, all departments of the Hong Kong SAR government are committed to boosting the economy and creating job opportunities in various industries. In terms of environmental protection, the Environment Bureau has adopted a number of new measures on the promotion of cleaner energy and renewable energy, energy efficiency, green building, green transportation, waste reduction and recycling, green infrastructure, and green innovative technologies. These measures will not only create green economic and employment opportunities and promote a green recovery, but will also continuously improve the environment and help Hong Kong move towards the goal of achieving carbon neutrality before 2050. To promote cleaner energy, the two power companies will continue to renew their gas-fired generating units to replace the coal-fired ones and develop an onshore liquefied natural gas terminal. On renewable energy, the government launched the feed-in tariffs in 2018 and solar harvest to install solar energy generation systems for schools and welfare organizations. Together with other facilitation measures, more than 180 million kilowatt hours of renewable energy can be produced. It is expected that the above-mentioned measures will create more than 5,000 jobs in relevant industries. The government also set aside a total of $3 billion to install small-scale RE systems on government premises. It is expected that about 27 million kilowatt hours of electricity will be generated per annum. To help various sectors save energy and reduce carbon emissions, the government introduced the $600 million Green Schools 2.0 Energy Smart Program and the $150 million Green Welfare NGOs to conduct energy audits and install energy-saving devices for primary and secondary schools and social welfare organizations. The program will achieve an electricity saving of 45 million kilowatt hours per annum. The government will also construct an additional district cooling system in the Kai Tak development area and new district cooling systems in Tung Chung New Town Extension East and Kwun Tong North New Development Area, respectively. The three projects with a total construction cost of about $14 billion can create saving of about 130 million kilowatt hours of electricity per annum and also create more than 1,600 job opportunities. In order to promote green transportation, the government has aside more than $10 billion last year to launch a series of measures, including the $2 billion EV charging at home subsidy scheme and the $7.1 billion ex gratia payment scheme to phase out about 40,000 Euro 4 diesel commercial vehicles. These measures can provide more than 700 jobs. On waste management, more than 700 job opportunities will be created by various measures on waste reduction and recycling, including collection and recycling services for waste papers, food waste and waste plastic, green communities recycling networks, including recycling stations, recycling stores and recycling spots, and the reverse vending machine pilot scheme for plastic beverage containers. The government will commence a number of green infrastructure projects in the coming 3 years, including construction and upgrading of sewerage treatment works, improvements and expansion of sewerage systems, rehabilitation of aging sewers, installation of dry weather flow interceptors, and retrofitting of noise barriers or enclosures at suitable existing road sections. The above green infrastructure projects are estimated to involve a total expenditure of about $14 billion and create 1,700 jobs. To capitalize on the enormous green finance opportunities, the government plans to expand the scale of the government's green bond program and arrange for the regular issuance of green bond totaling $175.5 billion within the next 5 years. having regard to the market situation. We will also launch the Green and Sustainable Finance Grant Scheme to provide subsidy for eligible entities to cover their expenses on bond issuance and external review services, which will enhance our position as a green finance hub in the region. In addition, the government has set up a $200 million green tech fund to provide better and more focused funding support to research and development projects which can help Hong Kong decarbonize and enhance environmental protection. It will promote the application of innovative technologies and create hundreds of job opportunities. As a whole, the above-mentioned resources devoted by the government can create more than 5,000 employment opportunities in the coming few years. The government's policy on carbon reduction in electricity generation will also drive investments in the private sector, creating another 5,000 or more employment opportunities. In total, more than 10,000 job opportunities will be created to support a green recovery. In the medium and long terms, the government will continue to promote green economic opportunities in various aspects in the course of striving towards carbon neutrality. For example, the government announced the Waste Blueprint for Hong Kong 2035 in February this year, setting out the vision of waste reduction, resources circulation, and zero landfill, and outlining the strategies, goals, and measures to meet the challenges of waste management up to 2035. Besides, we will allocate another $1 billion to the recycling fund to further support the upgrading and transformation of the recycling trade. This will benefit more than 1,000 recycling enterprises, providing thousands of employment opportunities and help develop a circular economy. Hong Kong's first roadmap on the popularization of EVs to be announced today will set out a long-term targets and related measures to seize the new registration of fuel-propelled private cars in or before 2035, providing new development opportunities for EVs and the relevant trades in the medium and long terms. Later this year, we will update a clean air plan for Hong Kong 2035 to formulate new targets and measures to further improve air quality. We will also update the Hong Kong's Climate Action Plan to set up long-term strategies for achieving carbon neutrality. These policy blueprints will establish new targets which are closely related to green finance, green innovative technology, and green industry, and will continuously promote the development of green economy in Hong Kong in the medium and long terms and create more green employment opportunities in the future. Thank you, President. Mr. Martin Liao. President, in terms of green recovery or low carbon economy, it has a very wide coverage. The Secretary is right that all these opportunities are interlinked. For example, green finance can finance the development of green innovation and technologies and also generate demand for advisory services and insurance. However, the Secretary is only repeating the government's environmental protection policy. The Secretary has not presented the macro picture to us. Now, the Bureau will only consolidate the data concerning the development of the environmental friendly industries. Will the government give us a more comprehensive set of figures for us to trace the development of the green economy in Hong Kong? Secretary, I thank the member for caring about the developments of the green industry as well as the job opportunities provided. Now we have the blueprints which have set out a clear direction for the development of green industry as well as the jobs created. Looking forward, we will collect more comprehensive data as well as carry out more in-depth analysis concerning these data. We have heard the members' view. We will do that so that we can have a more complete set of data to chart our medium to long-term policy. We will tap into the economic opportunities brought about by the green recovery. Thank you. This is Regina Ip. President, for some green industry practitioner, there are some who are fake. That's why we have the term greenwashing. Now, the international society is very concerned about whether comply with the ESG standard. There are lots of ratings as well as regulatory authority, for example, Standard & Poor's and Reuters and so on. So will the Secretary advise to the Secretary for Financial Services and Treasury whenever there is an investment into green sector, the bank should provide them with a low interest loan, and also the government should publish the green ratings for companies and encourage citizens to not to invest in those doing poorly. I thank Mrs. Regina Ip for her views. I would like to reiterate 2 points. First, to achieve carbon neutrality, we need to work together among bureaus and departments. That's why we have been working with the Financial Services and Treasury Bureau in the issuance of the government's green bond. And also we have consulted the industry on ensuring the ESG standard of companies. And also we have stepped up communication with the sector. We have set up platforms comprising governments and private sector's representatives to make the rating mechanism more scientific and objective. And also we have a set of policies to support that. Thank you. Mr. Ma Bong-kwok. In the past, eco-friendly industry has been regarded as our advantageous industry. It can create a lot of jobs because it is a labor-intensive industry. However, we haven't seen much progress. In foreign countries, green scientific projects can start very quickly. Under the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of surgical masks and PPEs are discarded as waste. According to media reports, in European countries, there are companies recycling or even up-recycling these waste products. It seems that we are lagging far behind. Has the government started work in this regard? For example, are there any studies concerning the recycling of PPE or wasted medical products? And also in the invitation of tender in the Eco Park for recycling wasted paper by using pulping facility, I would like to know the progress. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Ma. Mr. Ma mentioned that we are going to invite tender for a pulping facility in Eco Park to turn waste paper into pulp and export them to different places, including the mainland, as resources. This is ongoing. We are going to start inviting tender in the second quarter this year. In terms of our policy, according to our waste blueprints for Hong Kong 2035, we have adopted a different mindset as compared with before. Previously, we adopted the government's participation was not much because there was enough market incentives. However, at present, the private sectors cannot run on a self-financing model concerning the recycling of waste, plastic, waste, kitchen waste, and so on. That's why we are going to provide subsidies to them concerning logistics, because it makes up for a large part of the operational cost. Mr. Gary Chen. Thank you. The Secretary told us there are a lot of green activities going on in Hong Kong. However, the green infrastructure projects are not realized. I would like to follow up for Mr. Ma Fung Kwok. The paper recycling project claimed that it would be able to recycle some 3 million tons of waste paper every year. The contractor withdrew the bid for tender. That's why the site was laid vacant for 2 years. Now, the Secretary told us there is another project, that is the modern recycling facility for waste paper. But what about the previous tender, which did not succeed? Was compensation paid to the government? And also, are we going to have more green infrastructure? Secretary, thank you, Mr. Chen. The case is being handled by the court. That's why I'm not going to comment on the case. There is indeed opportunity in paper recycling business. Previously, the paper recycling industry relied on conventional technology. That's why more water and electricity was needed. However, with the tightening of regulation measures in the mainland, the technology of handling paper pulp has advanced a lot in recent years. That's why we would like to make use of this opportunity. In Hong Kong, we lack land, and also our electricity and water is more costly. That's why we would like the contractor to make use of the latest technology to upcycle our waste paper. We would speed up the process of tender invitation. This is a new technology, and less space will be required. So we hope that the pulping facility can be commissioned as soon as possible. And also, the pulping facility will not just handle ordinary waste paper from office, newspapers, and so on. For paper waste which could not be exported before, the pulping facility can also recycle them, and the stress on our landfill will be alleviated. Mr. Vincent Cheng, President, we already have the goal of carbon neutrality before 2050. As the chairman of the panel on environmental affairs, I have seen a lot of environmental blueprints being rolled out. For example, EV charging at home and green community program and green infrastructure. This is the right direction to go. It seems that the major difficulty lies in the lack of enough stakeholders and also the lack of talent nurturing. We cannot just rely on the Environmental Protection Bureau to do it. I've been working with the Environmental Protection Bureau concerning a project, as well as a university, and that was very good. I think we can work more in hand with university as well as other organizations so that we can extend the reach of these programs. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Zhang. At the end of last year, we have rolled out a green tech fund to support innovative environmental researchers. We encourage universities to work with businesses so that the application can be more suitable. Now, as at the end of February, in the first round of application, we have already received some 190 applications. By the middle of this year, we will be able to complete vetting these applications. And secondly, in dealing with climate change, we have to have inter-bureau efforts. So when we update the climate action plan, we will bring in the efforts from other bureaus as well. And also, we will need the sectors to work together with us. I also urge members to work together with us to promote environmental protection among citizens.
Thank you, Chairman. Due to the epidemic, the Kai Tak cruise terminal has not had vessels for many months. The operator has pointed out that in the past, most of the cruise passengers, they had inconvenience because they had to queue for a long time, carrying bulky luggage. Travel with taxis is inconvenient. On the other hand, the government had set aside 6 sites nearby to be built as hotels, and the remaining 4 of them would be rezoned for residential flats. So some members of the tourism industry feel that the government should improve ancillary transport and accommodation facilities to offer a better travel experience for cruise passengers. So can the government inform this council, 1, whether it has plans in the coming 3 years to provide car parks on the idle sites near Kai Tak cruise terminal, so local residents going on a cruise trip may choose to travel by private car and shorten the queue for taxis? And if there are details, they could disclose them, and if not, what are the reasons? Second, whether it has plans in the coming 3 years to introduce water taxi services plying between the cruise terminal and Kwun Tong Public Pier for use by cruise passengers, thereby shortening the queue for taxis and alleviating traffic load on roads. And if we have, do we have the details? And if not, why not? And third, whether it will keep the aforesaid 2 sites for hotel use so as to address the accommodation needs of cruise passengers in the future. If not, why not? Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development. Thank you, Mrs. Regina Yip, for the question. After consulting Development Bureau, Transport and Housing Bureau, I'll provide the following reply. In light of overall development, the government has been enhancing public transport services to meet development needs and the demand of cruise passengers. We have franchise bus, Green Money Bus, serving Kwun Tong, Kowloon City, the cruise terminal, as well as ferry services connecting North Point, Kwun Tong, and Kai Tak Runway Park. When there are ships calling at the cruise terminal, the operator will arrange extra shuttle bus services for cruise passengers and also provide ship call information to taxi trade in order to cater to the extra traffic demand. According to T-Date Transport Department's survey conducted in early 2020, the average waiting time was less than 5 minutes. In addition, the Civil Engineering and Development Department has completed road improvement works connecting Cruise Terminal and Kowloon Bay. It should be completed by 2022, and we also expect that the road D3, located north of the former runway, will substantially be completed by 2022. We also see that the existing road and railway infrastructure, as well as public transport services at Kai Tak, the government now proposes to implement a multimodal, environmentally friendly linkage system that includes electric buses, minibus services, travel later network, pedestrian and cycling paths, water taxis, etc., to connect railway stations, business districts, and public transport installations at Kai Tak, Kwun Tong, Aotaogok, and Kowloon Bay. This will enhance connectivity in the area and at the same time facilitate cruise passengers traveling to different places. In reply to Ms. Regina Zip, 3 questions, I have the following response. The cruise terminal is suspending immigration services because of the epidemic. When we resume services in the future, the public transport services, including taxis and shuttle buses, should be able to cater to passenger demand. The government also encourages cruise passengers to use public transport to travel to and from the cruise terminal. The government has no plans to provide substantial parking space in the vicinity for cruise passengers. In fact, the cruise terminal provides 120 public parking spaces for private cars, and the adjacent Kai Tak tourism node also reserves another 100 parking spaces for private cars. Second, in respect of waterborne traffic, as I said earlier, we already have ferry service between Kwun Kai Tak during weekends. The TD will negotiate with the operator if necessary. The TD is also working with relevant operator on water taxi service connecting Kai Tak, Hong Kong, Tsim Sha Tsui, West Kowloon Cultural District, and the trial service is expected to be launched in the second half of 2021. Third, in light of the latest economic situation, the Development Bureau is examining the feasibility of rezoning 5 commercial sites into residential use, and 3 of those are located next to the cruise terminal. The Kai Tak tourism node adjacent to cruise terminal will provide a minimum of 15% of total gross floor area for hotel use. Now, in general, the cruise passengers' demand for hotel accommodation are not that high because the cruise passengers from overseas, they have accommodation on the cruise, and they will visit different places in Hong Kong for shopping or sightseeing, and they will not stay near the cruise terminal area. In any event, we will monitor the hotel demand of cruise passengers and continue to review hotel supply in Hong Kong and consult with the relevant bureau and departments. Thank you. Ms. Regina Yip. Now, Hong Kong, first of all, we are the calling port for a lot of cruise routes, so the passengers might arrive a day or two early, stay in hotels, and before they board the cruise. So they have a lot of luggage, so having a water taxi and minibus is not convenient. And as you know, the outbreak, even though we have an outbreak around the world, they do have local tours. So it's similar to staycation locally. So these tourists are a family. They would have to take public, it's not convenient for them to take taxis, water taxis, and minibuses. So the industry has suggested setting aside some space for park and cruise. That would be for the longer term. But would you help out in providing tourism in our waters? Thank you, Mrs. Yip, for your suggestions. The hotel facilities in Hong Kong are sufficient, especially it might take time to recover after the epidemic. Regarding travel arrangements, I'm aware that public transport, the bus routes, they do have facilities for luggage, and when the cruise arrives in Hong Kong, typically they have dedicated shuttle buses. And in light of your second part of the question, we have contacted the tourism sector, including cruise operators. As Mrs. Regina Yip says, in the last few years, there is an opportunity to develop Hong Kong as a port of call for cruises. Now, there are difficulties in recent years because we've had outbreak on cruises, and even also occurred in Hong Kong. So the tourism sector has mentioned having cruises to nowhere or staycations. So we will discuss with the industry. The first obstacle is they have to comply with inspection, testing requirements. If you recall, having hotels as quarantine facilities also ran into a lot of problems. We have to look into management, air ventilation, and other factors. The second criteria is whether we would have confidence in having mass travel, because there are a lot of people congregating. We had discussed with the industry and Center for Health Protection. So when the situation improves, we can look into this. Ms. Yong Hwa-yan, I note that in Answer 3, the Development Bureau is looking to rezone 5 sites into residential use. Well, have you assessed that previously it was for hotel use and you want to convert to residential use? Would that lead to greater traffic demand because there is insufficient infrastructure support now? We don't have enough minibuses, buses, taxis, and we don't even have the water taxi service. If you rezone it for residential use, will that lead to a heavier traffic demand? Now that involves planning and transportation. So before I hand it over to Development Bureau, I just want to reiterate that when the cruises arrive in Hong Kong, there's a special arrangement. They will inform the taxi trade, and the taxi trade will provide more taxis. The cruise operators also arrange for shuttle bus services for the cruise passengers. And if these cruise passengers are locals, they are familiar with traffic options. So in East Kowloon or Diamond Hill, there are shopping centers for non-local tourists. The purpose is to reduce the demand for traffic. Development Bureau. Thank you, Ms. Yong. In 2017, the government set 6 sites of commercial land and took 4 of them and converted it to residential use. The other 2 sites were reserved for commercial use. But in light of the latest economic situation and our recurrent need for housing supply, so we're now converting 5 sites of land and looking into the feasibility of converting it to residential use. We'll have an outcome by the end of the year, and depending on the outcome, we will activate or proceed with town planning procedures. So initially, we feel we can provide some 5,800 housing units. So in this feasibility study, whether it is suitable to convert for residential use, it depends on the individual land use. So we need technical assessment, traffic, infrastructure. All these have to be feasible before we can initiate the town planning procedures. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Frankie Yik. Thank you, Chairman. In paragraph 3, the Secretary mentions that the queuing time for taxis is typically less than 5 minutes, according to TD. Well, but Secretary, have you tried the cruise services? I can tell you definitely it's not 5 minutes. I went there myself. So whenever cruises arrive, my phone rings off the hook. There are calls for assistance. Now, Ms. Regina asked for parking space. Now, we can see that the design of the cruise terminal, it was built on the concept of just a berthing terminal. We don't even have sufficient dining facilities at the terminal. It wasn't designed as a call of port. Now, the operator, their estimate was much more accurate, much better than the government. So, instead of serving as a berthing terminal, they had designs for a port of call, and they needed sufficient parking space. So this is my follow-up question. We have a piece of land opposite the terminal. Since there is no fixed plan, can we increase parking space? Thank you, Mr. Yik, for your suggestion and question. The survey results I quoted just now were from TD. Now, we are in communication with the operator. The service providers such as taxis are in close contact. If there is business to be done, there will be people trying to meet that need. Regarding parking space, I mentioned that the terminal has 100 parking spaces, and the high-tech node also has another 100 parking spaces. I'm aware in East Kowloon, in the future sports park, there would be a lot of parking spaces as well. There will be some 800 parking spaces in the sports center. The whole Kai-Tak area is connected, including connection to the MTR. So we believe that it would improve after all the works are completed. So speaking on behalf of TD, if we want to meet all vehicle demand, this might not be the most appropriate arrangement. We have to rely on public transport, for example. When the cruises arrive, there's extra bus service, and our buses have luggage facilities. So we will review the situation, and after the epidemic, we hope to cater to these needs, Mr. Lok Jong Hong. The Kai-Tak Cruise Terminal serves local residents as well as tourists. Now, we would like water taxis to provide service as soon as possible. Now, this reminds me of a environmental friendly link system that was abandoned. But now we have an opportunity. In the response to the third question, the government said that they would rezone 3 sites out of 5 into residential use. Now, according to the media, there would be 5,800 units available, and the cost would amount to more than 50 billion. The Kai-Tak environmental friendly link, is there any opportunity for it to be revived, and would you consider the FTU's proposal just having a short connection to the Kai-Tak station? Thank you for the question. Now, Kowloon East environmental friendly link, we had announced. The feasibility study has been concluded. So even when we rezone the commercial land to residential use, the traffic impact isn't that significant. When we did the feasibility study, we had anticipated after all the future development was completed, we saw that economically and technically it wasn't that feasible. Now, could we connect Kai Tak to the end of the runway, we had looked into that as well, and for similar reasons, we found that it wasn't feasible financially. So we suggest a multimodal system, and that would include electric vehicles running on the minibus and bus routes, and having travelators connecting to the end of the runway, connecting to Kwun Tong, Kowloon Bay, and also providing pedestrian and cycling paths along the promenade, and also creating a landscaped platform connecting to Kwun Tong MTR and so on. So all these will improve the accessibility. Now, even if we complete a part of it, the suspended, it's not necessary to build the suspended links. The public and industry are concerned about the cruise, when it can reopen. Just now, Mrs. Regina Ip also said that some countries and jurisdictions, including Taiwan, Singapore, and countries in Europe, are already relaxing cruise operations. So under what conditions will you meet with the industry regarding the reopening of the terminal? When will you contact the operators? Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Yu. If we are to allow or relax cruise terminal operation, first of all, the epidemic situation has to be under control. We also have to have confidence in the epidemic situation in other countries. There is a lot of work involved, and the whole industry faced many difficulties. So in this respect, we have to keep an eye on the epidemic, but we're not just sitting on our thumbs. The industry is also helping itself, where they want to test crews and passengers. I think Hong Kong people will accept that, and the ventilation, infection, the food and beverage, the number of people, and changing room facilities and so on, all these can be improved, and that is when this epidemic comes under better control, when everybody feels safe, when other countries are doing a good job, we can look into operating the cruises again. And as Mrs. Regina Ip said, we can have cruises to nowhere. But ultimately, the epidemic has to be under control, and we can even start with vaccinations.
Question 4, the Honourable Lau Kwok Fan. Thank you, President. There are views that the government should optimize the use of the lands surrounding various boundary crossings in the new territories in order to develop port economy and increase housing supply. However, the government has not made holistic considerations in respect of the development of such lands, resulting in large tracts of agricultural land and fish ponds having been left deserted for a long time. In this connection, will the government inform this Council, 1, whether it has compiled statistics on the current total area of the deserted agricultural lands and fish ponds surrounding various boundary crossings in the NT, of the plans in place to unleash their development potential, whether it will conduct an overall planning for the deserted lands, including rezoning such as land for the redevelopment of NDAs or new towns, thereby increasing housing supply. 2 of its new thinking on putting the lands surrounding various boundary crossings in the NT to optimal use, such as whether it will construct office buildings for relevant government departments and develop a center for innovative industries on such land so as to develop a port economic zone, where thereby better seizing the opportunities brought by the development of the Hong Kong, Guangdong, Macau GBA. If so, of the details, if not the reasons for that. 3, whether they will consider setting up an ad hoc committee to study the implementation of and conduct holistic planning for the development projects on the land surrounding various boundary crossings in the NT, as well as coordinate the implementation of the relevant projects. If so, of the details, if not the reasons for that. Secretary for Development. President, other than the Shenzhen Bay Port, there are 6 land boundary control points at Hong Kong and Shenzhen boundary, including Lok Ma Chau Spur Line, Lo Wu, Man Kam To, Hung Yuen Wai, and Shuttlecock boundary control points. In planning a spatial layout of Hong Kong, consideration will be given to how to leverage the geographical advantages of land near the boundary crossings with view to meeting the demand for land in Hong Kong and facilitating economic development. The Hong Kong 2030 Plus towards a planning vision and strategic Transcending 2030 study recommended to develop a North Economic Belt in the northern part of NT. The economic belt, extending from Lok Ma Chau in the west to Hung Yuen Wai, is not only for increasing housing land, but also for research and development, modern logistics, warehousing, and other emerging industries. The Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation and Technology Park in the Lok Ma Chau Loop and the new development area in the NT North fall on this development access, and these industries can fully leverage the geographical advantages and developmental potential of the area. With regard to various parts of the question, after consulting the relevant policy bureaus and departments, our reply as follows. According to Agriculture, Fisheries and Conservation Department, currently the total area of farmland in Hong Kong is about 4,200 hectares, about 20% of which is under active farming, and the total area of fish ponds is about 1,100 hectares, of which 20% is used for fish culture. These farmland and fish ponds are mainly located in the Northwest NT, with some near boundary control points. In the course of land use planning, including new development areas, full consideration is given to how best utilize the geographical advantages of the area. However, whether the land is currently deserted is not the main consideration for developing a site. Instead, the shape, area, and topography surrounding developments, ecological and environmental constraints, and provision of infrastructure are more important. At present, we've included areas in the vicinity of Lok Ma Chau Spur Line, Man Kam To, Hung Yuen Wai boundary control points in the NTN NDA under planning. The NTN NDA covers over 1,400 hectares of land, comprising 3 potential development areas, PDAs, i.e. Sentien Lok Ma Chau Development Node, the NTN New Town covering Hung Yuen Wai, Ping Che, Ta Ku Ling, Hung Long Hang, and Queen's Hill, and Man Kam To Logistics Corridor. Our main planning concept is to build the new towns, the infrastructure, and ancillary facilities through comprehensive planning and making optimal use of land covering brownfield sites and farmland to meet the long-term social and economic developments of Hong Kong. The NTN NDA has easy access to and from Shenzhen and Eastern Guangdong, and the geographically well suited for research and development, modern logistics, warehousing, and storage, as well as emerging industries. Synergy can therefore be achieved with the Hong Kong Shenzhen INT Park in the Lok Ma Chau Loop and the scientific research and technology developments in Shenzhen, thus grasping the opportunities for development in the mainland. This is also in line with the development strategy of the Guangdong Hong Kong Macau GBA, under which the central government strongly supports the cooperation between Hong Kong and Shenzhen in developing an international INT hub. Concerning the Santien Lok Ma Chau Development Node, a study has been commenced in September 2019. Preliminary assessment shows that the development node, with an area of about 320 hectares, with the northern link under planning, will have the potential for medium to high density development, yielding about 31,000 residential flats, 7% being public housing, providing home for 84,000 residents and about 64,000 jobs. And 50% of 50 hectares or 80% of the node will be designated for enterprise and technology park for corporate offices and information technology use. This will time with the adjoining development of the Hong Kong Shenzhen INT Park in the Lok Ma Chau will achieve synergy. Since Hong Kong and Shenzhen governments have agreed on obtained the central government support for the implementation of the co-location arrangements at the redeveloped Huang Gong Port, 20 hectares of land can be released at the existing Lok Ma Chau boundary control point for other users, and will consider as a whole how to utilize such released land when planning for the development node. The Man Kam To Logistics Corridor and NTN New Town in proximity of Man Kam To boundary control point and Hung Yuen Wai boundary control point, respectively, cover an even larger area totaling about 1,140 hectares are expected to accommodate at least 200,000 residents and provide about 134,000 jobs. We will explore how these areas can tie with the development trend of GBA and formulate plans for the industries and new jobs in the area with a view to boosting Hong Kong's economic vibrancy, creating job opportunities in these areas, and thereby easing the problem of overconcentration of jobs in the urban areas. For example, we've reserved 56 hectares of land in the proximity of Hung Yuen Wai BCP for development of Science Park or Industrial Estate. Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks Corporation has completed a visionary study for developing the land as a new industrial estate and settled mode and direction of development, and we commenced the engineering and technical feasibility study in the second quarter of 2021. In the course of planning, NTN NDA will reserve land for government institutions and community facilities, including government offices, as appropriate. In fact, the plans to orderly move large government offices from core business areas to various locations for effective land use. In other NDAs, such as Hong Shui Kiu Ha Chun NDA, land is also reserved for large-scale government complex facilities to serve the local community. To take forward the 3 projects of NTN NDA, the government intends to submit funding application to the Legislative Council the first half of this year. The funding will cover the investigation and design for Sentian Lok Ma Chau development node, as well as the planning and engineering study of the NTN New Town and Man Kam To Logistics Corridor in advance. 3. The government has set up appropriate steering and coordinating mechanisms at different levels to take forward land development. The Development Bureau has a team led by a directorate officer responsible for coordinating with departments to offer holistic and comprehensive considerations at the land and project planning stage for the various NDAs in the NT and developments in the vicinity of the boundary crossings. There are also teams led by directorate officers under the Civil Engineering and Development Bureau Department to liaise closely with the relevant departments during the process of implementing the projects, so that the works of site formation, infrastructure, and various public facilities are carried out in a timely and orderly manner. Now, we do not have any plan to set up an ad hoc committee specifically for developments near boundary crossing points. Thank you. Mr. Lau Kok Fan. So the Secretary said that they have always been thinking how to optimize land use near our boundary control points, but the reality is the land there is rather undeveloped, a stark opposition from what's happening in Guangdong or Shenzhen. Now we have 4,200 hectares of land, farmland not used, and also 100 hectares of fish pond not used, and then 4,000 odd hectares, 2,435 hectares have been released for use. And according to the Secretary, in considering whether a site is suitable for development, they do not just consider whether it is derelict, is deserted. They also consider the shape, topography, availability of infrastructure, etc. In fact, when the government has the will, they can always do it. We have over 1,000 hectares of land there. We have a keen demand for housing, and I think it is unjustified that the land should be left unused there. So my question for the Secretary is, do you have the courage or new thinking to overcome the ecological and environment constraints so that 1,000 hectares of land idle now can be used, for instance, the wetland buffer zones, or for those wetland buffer zones already rezoned, can you relax the development parameters so that the site can be used for providing housing and to serve our economy? Secretary, thank you. Now, we cannot adopt a fragmented approach in land development. In NT, we do not just consider individual plots isolatedly. Now, by means of high-density development, we want to provide residential, commercial land use so that although Hong Kong is a small place, we still have a lot of country parks, open space, and also leisure areas. Now, Mr. Gordon Wu has made a study, done a study, and he's of the view that we need infrastructure to support development in the NT. Now, near Hang Yuen Wai, near Man Kam To, near Lok Ma Chau Spur Line, we are very eagerly pressing ahead with developments that can serve Hong Kong. Now, for the wetland buffer areas, can we really use them for development? The answer is no. It depends on the local circumstances. For buffer areas, we can allow low-density development. Whether the buffer areas can have their development parameters relaxed without affecting the ecology, this is being considered. Mr. Kenneth Lau. Thank you, Chair. The 14th five-year plan was just approved last week, and there should be more development in the GBA, but I believe the government has not kept in pace with the country's development in planning for more development in the NT. So may I remind the Secretary once again, under GBA and also the 14th five-year plan, the area in our boundary crossing points are very important land parcels, and we should earmark land there so that Hong Kong can take part in the GBA development. I've asked whether the closed area of Shuttlecock can be opened, but the government has consistently said no, quoting security reasons. I'd like to know whether the government has any intention to do that. Instead, it would like to reclaim land at Pillar Point, at Black Point, and I think this is polluting the area. Do you think this is the best way to develop GBA? And we're going to have supra burial areas in Shiling. I'd like to know whether this goes against the development principle of GBA. Let me declare I am a villager of Long Gu Tan, and I also have land in the NT. The reason why we have sewage facilities and burial facilities located in northeast NT, because we need such sewage facilities to tie with the new developments in Kutong and NT East in the future. And then these facilities are not unique in the NT. Now, at Saling Burial Ground, there will be a new columbarium and also a crematorium and also a funeral parlor planned. In dealing with these facilities, we have done sufficient assessment in terms of the impacts on the environment. Now, for Shuttlecock, it is very different from other areas of Hong Kong. In Chong Ying Street, there can be a flow of goods and people without any proper control point. So should Shuttlecock be further opened, then all these considerations will have to be dealt with very seriously. And for Black Pillar, our view is that there is potential for further development here, and that is Long Gu Tan, and we have need for logistics arrangement. Now we are studying the Two Moon South link. We'll see whether that can be linked that can link up with the river trade terminal, which is under use right now, and perhaps it can be further developed, and this will tie with development in Tuen Mun West. We will start a study very soon, and then we will seek further support from the council for that study. Ms. Eunice Yong. In the main reply, the secretary said that a northern economic belt will be developed so that there will be land for housing, modern logistics, R&D, warehouses, and emerging industries. The site is about 1,400 hectares. We still have the East Lantau metropolis, so will there be a North Lantau metropolis here so that we can have a core commercial node here? After all, the future population will be hundreds of thousands of people, because in Santang, there are plenty of 84,000 residents, and the logistics corridor at Mankomto, the planned population is 200,000, quite substantial. So if the site is just for R&D, INT, and logistics, will that be the scope will be too narrow? Can you expand the business opportunities and make a North metropolis there? And the site can also be used for tourism and for leisure and recreational purposes. Secretary, as said by Ms. Yong, we will have up to 300,000 people living in the northern part of Lantau with lots of job opportunities. But there is a fundamental difference from Khao Yi Chau, because they are two different locations. Large international headquarters, INT industries may be more suitable for Khao Yi Chau because it's close to central. With the road network properly built, the distance is only 10 kilometers and also 10 odd kilometers from international airport. So we don't believe North NT can have a core business area. But when it comes to INT industries and sectors where there is plenty of cooperation opportunities of Shenzhen, I think this is a feasible area. So we are talking about more than 100,000 of jobs to be provided. And in Hong Shui Chun, Ha Chun, NDA, there will be another 100,000 odd jobs. I hope that by means of such developments, we can address the imbalance between demand and supply of jobs and flats. We don't believe West Tuen Mun can be another core business area, but then it should be suitable for retail and other business activities. Mr. Michael Tian. Regarding replanning of Lowell Station, I just came back from Beijing. I've checked there. Now it was said that Lowell should be replanned so that there can be collocation of customs and immigration clearance at the subway of Shenzhen, and that land can be leased to us at a low rate. Now, as we all know, you have to walk a long way. You have to walk past Lowell Commercial City, and there is no traffic connection. So Lowell has lost out to Lok Ma Chau Spur Line Station. Now, if the whole area is to be redeveloped, and then just like Shangshui, with a split of 70-30 of public and private housing, there can be plenty of land for housing. So can we release the land at Lowell for construction of public housing? Because we are short of land in Hong Kong. And right now, crossing the border at that location is really not convenient. You have to drag your suitcases along. yes, apart from Lowu, Long March and Wong Kong will see some replanning. Long March and Wong Kong, now we're discussing co-location arrangement there. And we are conducting some very specific studies there. For Lowu, the situation is like this. The Transport and Housing Bureau will be the lead bureau. We're aware of the idea from the mainland, and we've started communication with them on this. When we have made substantive progress, we will give an account to the community in due course. Now, if land at Lowu can be released, the Development Bureau will then start the relevant study. But the development potential is not as big as Mr. Michael said. Now, there are only 4 hectares of land at Lowu and 20 hectares of land at Long Ma Chau. Bear in mind that there will be a railway there in the future. And for residential developments, we have to take into account noise impacts of the railway as well.
Question 5, Mr. Michael Look. From the 23rd to the 24th of January this year, the government set up a restricted area in Jordan, arranged for persons within the area to take a test for the COVID-19, and distributed to each of them a food pack which contained 4 cans of canned food of different types, 3 of which were cans with easy-to-open covers. Those persons staying in the guest houses within the area, including journalists, were also distributed food packs. A news report of the Radio Television Hong Kong, RTHK, pointed out that no can opener nor cooking implement is provided in the guest house, and attached a photo of a food pack in which none of the cans showed the side with a rain pool. Some members of the public have criticized that the photo, by willfully hiding the rain pools of the cans, misled readers into thinking that all the cans could only be opened with a can opener. RTHK issued a statement countering the criticisms as smear accusations, which it severely condemned, and insisting that the news report had stated the facts. However, a newspaper which had published a similar photo subsequently issued a statement in which it stated that the photo concerned had been removed as the photo was misleading, admitted its oversight, and made an apology. In this connection, will the government inform this council? 1. Whether it has requested RTHK to conduct a review and submit a report on the practices adopted in the news report, if so, of the progress of the review, and whether it will submit the report to this council. And 2. Whether RTHK issued the aforesaid statements after obtaining the approval of the then Director of Broadcasting. If so, whether the Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development has requested an explanation from the Director of Broadcasting. If so, of the justifications for giving the approval. If no approval has been obtained, whether RTHK has reviewed if the contents of the statements were appropriate, if it has, of the review outcome, if it has not, the reasons for that. Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development. President, on the 23rd of January this year, Radio Television Hong Kong, RTHK, reported on the setting up of a restricted area in Jordan by the government in response to the epidemic. The news report mentioned the time of cordoning off, arrangements for compulsory testing, and the types and quantity of supplies distributed to people inside the cordoned area. It was also stated that neither can openers nor cooking utensils were provided in the guest house. A photo attached to the report showed only the bottom of 4 cans along with other goods, without mentioning whether any such cans were equipped with pool open taps. The report has aroused public concern, and there were views that the public would be misled by the news reports into believing that some supplies distributed could not be used. With prior agreements of the then Director of Broadcasting, RTHK issued a statement on the 25th of January that it strongly condemned such smearing views and reiterated that the news report had stated the facts As at end of February, RTHK received a total of 548 complaints about the report. In response to Mr. Michael Look's questions, in view of widespread public concern over the report, the Commerce and Economic Development Bureau, CEDB, has sought to gain an understanding from RTHK and requested it to handle the complaints seriously, including a review of the causes of the concern, the possibility of providing readers with more information and a more comprehensive coverage of facts at the time so as to avoid misunderstanding and bias or even queries about the objectivity of the reports by the RTHK. As a public service broadcaster and a government department, RTHK will always be accountable to society. While it is natural that there are different views on its news reports, RTHK should respond to public criticisms in a more positive and proactive manner. In order to uphold the highest professional standards of journalism as pledged in the Charter of RTHK, RTHK should first look into complaints objectively and on the basis of facts, make timely clarifications to the public, listen humbly to different views, and try to better itself where there is room for improvement. RTHK should learn from the experience gained in the handling of this case. Over the past half year, CEDB has conducted an in-depth review of and made recommendations on the governance and management of RTHK. A review report was released in February. The review report pointed out that there are major deficiencies in RTHK's mechanisms for editorial management and complaints handling. RTHK will seriously follow up the recommendations of the review report. In the process, RTHK should seek advice from the RTHK Board of Advisors and other stakeholders. CEDB will monitor RTHK's follow-up work. Thank you, President. Mr. Michael Look. Thank you, President. The Secretary is trying to put down the matter lightly in his response. However, one point I agree with, that is, the RTHK will handle this matter seriously. We hope RTHK will not become the BBC Global Services, who is very proud of disseminating fake news and working against China. However, the then Director of Broadcasting, Mr. Leung Kao-wing, has condoned such behavior. Now we have the new Director of Broadcasting, Mr. Patrick Lee. I have high hopes for him. Now, the Secretary said he would deal with the issue seriously. So how? Will you carry out an investigation on the reporter to see whether he did that deliberately? He had edited the report in such a way that it is biased. So is the RTHK still upholding the principle of being impartial and accurate? Secretary. President, I have mentioned how we would deal with the case in my response. I will not repeat. According about Mr. Michael Look's question, we have a high standard for news reports. We often refer to the Charter of Radio Television Hong Kong about accurate and impartial reporting. And also, according to the Charter, the editorial principle must be accurate and fair, especially 3.1. It says the RTHK's reporting should be accurate and impartial to reflect the truth, and also RTHK has to provide a comprehensive report on facts. That's why the RTHK should uphold the pledges under the Charter as well as the guideline to deal with reporting with impartiality. And also in terms of complaint handling, in the governance and management review report, it is mentioned that the management has to deal with the complaint seriously and respond to the public. What question has not been answered? He hasn't answered me whether he considered this report to be a fair and impartial report. As simple as that. Anything to add, Secretary? President, I have already covered that in my previous reply. Thank you. Mr. Ben Chen. President, concerning the restricted area in Jordan's report, it really tarnished RTHK's reputation. The outcome is very serious. In the end, RTHK even issued an announcement to deny its fault. It is so baffling. This report made us question the RTHK's commitment to the charter. They did not report the truth and they did not follow the guidelines. This is very serious. In the main reply, the government said 548 complaints were received. I understand that an investigation has been carried out, but what about the outcome? There were 7 complaints substantiated against RTHK, and RTHK was condemned for one of the cases. But so what? With so many complaints, even some substantiated, has the RTHK carried out any measures to punish those are related to the complaints, or even remove these staff from their original position so that they could not cause additional harm to RTHK's reputation? President, Mr. Ben Chen mentioned 2 kinds of complaints. One is complaints made to the Communications Authority. Like other broadcaster, RTHK is subject to the rules laid down by the Communications Authority for broadcasters as a whole. Mr. Ben Chen mentioned 6 substantiated complaints of RTHK's shortcomings. RTHK has adopted different measures, for example, pooling the relevant episodes, issuing apologies, and so on. Besides programs in terms of editorial policy, as well as program quality, RTHK will carry out reviews as well. And also, besides complaints made to the Communications Authority, there are complaints made to the RTHK. Like other governmental departments, the RTHK has a set of mechanisms to handle these complaints. These are also covered by the governance and management of RTHK review report. As a governmental department, RTHK has deficiencies in handling complaints. RTHK lags behind other governmental departments in its handling of complaints. So RTHK will have to make improvements according to the review reports. And also, like Mr. Ben Chen mentioned, for substantiated complaints with Communications Authority or with RTHK, if it is found that the reporting is not truthful and if there are ethic issues with staff, and RTHK will have to follow it up. What question has not been answered? I was asking about the 7 substantiated complaints, or if this complaint, if it is substantiated, will you punish those people responsible? Secretary, President, for substantiated complaints or future complaints, in dealing with these complaints, RTHK will adhere to its own mechanism. It will look into the cause of the complaints as well as the response. If necessary, RTHK will follow up the matter in human resource management. Mr. Holden Chow, we have seen programs from RTHK violating the charter. So we are asking about the how we can make sure that the charter is adhered to. Are there any suspension? For example, there have been prosecutors under the DOJ encouraging people to protest against the national security law. Now the prosecutor has been suspended from work. It has been reported on the media. Should we apply the same standard? to RTHK as a public service broadcaster. If RTHK staff have violated the charter, should they be suspended from work? Secretary. Concerning Mr. Holden Zhao's question, as a governmental department, RTHK is subject to the same standard as other governmental departments. If there are irregularities, the staff will be dealt with according to the same standard for civil servants. Ms. Alice Mack. President, in the main reply, the Secretary mentioned that RTHK, as a public service broadcaster and a government department, it should serve to benefit society. It should be credible in its reports. However, recently, the community is very polarized. RTHK often gives us the impression that it is biased and it favors a certain group and targets another. It serves to jeopardize the credibility of its reporting. It is very shameful. In the main reply, the CDB would follow up on the work of RTHK. So what mechanism do you have in monitoring RTHK's follow-up work? How can we rebuild RTHK's image as a fair and impartial broadcaster? How can the CEDB monitor the progress? And can you give us a timetable? Secretary. Thank you, Ms. Alice Mack. Recently, there have been a lot of complaints against RTHK. Some have been substantiated, and there are some very serious cases. For example, for the 6 cases handled by the Communications Authority, the natures are very serious. That's why we have spent half a year's time. Through the work of a task force, we have carried out an in-depth study in terms of the governance and management of RTHK to locate the deficiencies. And we have listed out all these shortcomings. Most importantly, we have to make sure that the RTHK adheres to the charter and be held accountable to the public. There are several issues. First, concerning the governance and human resources management within RTHK, RTHK has to be responsible to the CEDB, which is responsible for the policy issues. Secondly, RTHK will be subject to the regulation by the Communications Authority, which will handle the complaints. Thirdly, it is mentioned in the charter that there is a board of advisors. The board of advisors will not participate directly in its editorial work. However, concerning the editorial principles as well as the quality of its programs, the board of advisors would provide advice. So these are what we are going to do in terms of monitoring RTHK. Mr. Peter Shiu. Thank you, President. Secretary, in the past few years, many members of the public had a lot of concerns about the editorial work of RTHK. For example, they targeted the police. I think some of these programs were very outrageous. Now, there are at least 7 cases about shortcomings in the editorial process. So I hope you should provide RTHK with the right direction. Now, honestly speaking, not all programs under the RTHK is problematic. For programs which has nothing to do with politics, they are of high quality. Now, some RTHK staff members have been calling me in the past few days because it seems that the entire city is accusing them. They have been assuring me that they would be able to adhere to the charter, and they are worried that if RTHK is closed, they will lose their job. Now, I hope you can keep RTHK because it has very good hardware. You just need to address the deficiencies. So, will the secretary tell me whether you will keep RTHK and whether you and how you will make sure that RTHK is up to standard as a public service broadcaster? I thank Mr. Peter Shiu for his views. RTHK has its own value as a public service broadcaster in the government's department. If the RTHK can achieve the objectives set out in the charter by itself, then it is very valuable. The situation is RTHK has been doing well, and their programs are well received by the public, and they are very diligent staff members in RTHK. However, there have indeed been programs causing controversies in the community, and there are even substantiated complaints. Some principles adopted by other broadcasters have been violated. For example, untruthful reporting and reporting without verification of facts. So it is up to the entire department, under the leadership of the Director of Broadcasting, as the Editor-in-Chief, to lead his team to achieve that. Sometimes it is not about political stances. Every program should be impartial, fair, and accurate. They should uphold the highest standard to create quality programs to serve its functions under the charter. As a public service broadcaster, it has to sustain citizenship and civil society, as well as promoting knowledge of one country, two systems. And also, according to the charter, it has to provide a platform so that the public can voice their views without fear and bias. With sufficient monitoring, RTHK can still serve as a very valuable public service broadcaster.
Mr. Junius Ho said that he would have Ms. Priscilla Leung ask the question on his behalf. Chairman, since 30th of June last year, Article 7 of the National Security Law for Hong Kong has been implemented, and it stipulates that the Hong Kong SAR shall complete as early as possible legislation for safeguarding national security as stipulated in the Basic Law. So in other words, the Hong Kong SAR should, pursuant to Article 23 of the Basic Law, enact laws of its own to prohibit acts endangering national security. The government has also repeatedly indicated that Hong Kong SAR has a constitutional obligation to enact legislation on Article 23. So in this connection, will the government inform the Council of the latest progress of the work to enact legislation pursuant to Article 23, and 2, whether, according to the government's assessment, the relevant legislative work can be completed within the current term of the Legislative Council? If the assessment outcome is in the affirmative of the legislative time, if it is negative, what are the reasons for that? Chairman, I'd like to respond as follows. Hong Kong SAR is an security. The Hong Kong SAR has the Constitution on Article 23 of the Basic Law to prohibit any act of treason, secession, sedition, subversion against the Central People's Government, or theft of state secrets, prohibit foreign political organizations or bodies from conducting political activities in the SAR, to prohibit political or bodies of Hong Kong SAR from establishing ties with foreign political organizations. Article 7 of the Hong Kong National Security Law clearly stipulates that the SAR should complete as early as possible legislation for safeguarding national security as stipulated in the Basic Law of the Hong Kong SAR, and shall refine relevant laws. The SAR government has been carrying out relevant work in respect of enactment of legislation of Basic Law Article 23. Such work includes examining the bill submitted by the Hong Kong government to the Legislative Council in 2003 and conducting legal research. I'd like to point out the following. First, there has been drastic changes in Hong Kong's national security risk since the attempt to enact legislation in 2003. This period saw acts and activities such as the illegal Occupy Central in 2014, the Mong Kok riot in 2016, the establishment of the Hong Kong National Party, which was banned in 2018 for advocating Hong Kong independence, and in particular there was a spate of violence and riots perpetrated by rioters since June 2019, which lasted for more than 10 months. During the period, rioters wantonly blocked roads, seriously vandalized shops, MTR stations, and other public facilities. They hurled a large number of petrol bombs, set fires, violently stormed and trashed the Legislative Council building, damaged government premises, as well as willfully assaulting people holding different views. Local terrorism started to breed, as marked by seizure of large quantities of explosive firearms and bullets. Illegal acts advocating Hong Kong independence were rampant, and interference from external forces was severe, with shameless individuals colluding with external forces and willingly serve as puppets and foreign proxies, begging foreign countries for sanctions against China. Scores of saboteurs attempted mutual destruction with the intention of jumping off the cliff with Hong Kong and pushing Hong Kong residents into the abyss. Some even plotted subversion against state power, posing grave threat to national security. The implementation of Hong Kong national security law has delivered immediate results. Hong Kong has emerged from chaos into stability with a significant reduction in violent acts. Activists endangering Hong Kong national security have either fled or announced their withdrawal. Advocacy of Hong Kong independence has subsided. The community has returned to normal, and people's lawful rights are protected. This fully testifies why legislation for safeguarding national security is important and necessary. However, law-abiding awareness among the public has been greatly weakened, and advocates of Hong Kong independence have not given up. So we need to remain vigilant. Hence, legislation of Basic Law, Article 23, has to be enacted and must be done so comprehensively and be able to tackle serious and extreme circumstances which may arise. Secondly, the Hong Kong National Security Law has stipulated 4 categories of offenses, namely secession, subversion, terrorist activities, and collusion with a foreign country, or with external elements to endanger national security. 2 of the 7 categories of offenses or activities stipulated by Basic Law Article 23, that is secession and subversion against the CPG, are already covered by the law. When examining the enactment of legislation on BL 23, we have to determine whether it is no longer necessary for Hong Kong SAR to legislate on secession and subversion against the CPG, or we have to review if there are other acts involving these 2 categories of offenses which are not prohibited under the Hong Kong National Security Law and would need to be dealt with the legislation on Basic Law 23. At the same time, we have to ensure that the relevant details of legislation must not conflict with the decision of the National People's Congress on establishing and improving legal system and enforcement mechanisms for Hong Kong SAR to safeguard national security and Hong Kong National Security Law. Since the enactment of the law, the police have arrested 100 persons suspected of having committed offenses. The DOJ is now prosecuting 5 cases under the national security law, including secession, inciting secession, terrorist activities, collusion with a foreign country or external elements to endanger national security, and conspiracy to commit subversion. The court hearings are underway, and the implementation process, in particular court decisions, interpretation of legal provisions and the application, the procedures and experience of which could provide valuable reference for legislation on BL23. Third, safeguarding national security is the top priority of every country, and different countries have effective laws in place. These relevant laws and experience is worth our reference. We need to examine the content of relevant laws, measures adopted, when approaches used. A lot of work is involved, and the scope is also very complex and should not be underestimated. Fourth, looking back on experience of legislative proposal on BL23 in 2003, the government had prepared detailed consultation over a 3-month period. There were diverse views. Some people felt the provisions were too stringent, and others felt that they should have greater deterrent effect. I believe that there will also be diverse public views, so we need to draw up effective and pragmatic provisions. We also need to conduct public consultation properly, formulate appropriate publicity, and explain and communicate with members of the public, explaining legislative principles and details. We also have to guard against demonization and malicious smear of BL23 by people with ulterior motives. We've already undertaken various work regarding legislation of BL23, and we should not underestimate the complexity. Regarding the legislative timetable, we need to make objective judgment on the legislative work. In light of the work and scope that I described, the considerations and complexity and the requirements under Basic Law, Hong Kong National Security Law, the SAR government will complete the legislation of BL23 as early as possible, but it would be difficult to complete in the remaining term of the current Legislative Council. Mrs. Priscilla Lam, I agree that Hong Kong has turned a new chapter after implementing national security law. Now, if we look at the BL23 legislation, I believe that